Okay, today is May 17, 2024, and just kind of going through our garden beds over here, some work. I wasn't originally going to record a video today until I realized that we're making some major changes. I'm not just weeding as I originally intended, and so I figured I'd take some video and explain things a little bit. This is our main garden area. This is where for decades my parents had gardens, and they used to be able to get in here with a tractor and plow it every year. Can't do that anymore. These trees, we need to get rid of these trees that were allowed to grow. That's a whole other issue. When we first started gardening here, I think it was 2019 was our first garden. It was in this area over here. And basically we threw down some mulch the year before, some straw, and just tried to amend the soil so we could actually stick a pitchfork into it and not break it. And so we didn't measure anything out when we made these beds. We just kind of threw down logs that were from when we had trees cut away from the power lines in the roof, threw in some soil and did what we could. But as time goes on, we need to make things more permanent. And so we're looking at making high raised beds using dead spruce trees we're harvesting out of a grove in our yard. And over time, we do want high raised beds like this. And in progress right now, we have these. And I've been working on 9 foot by 4 foot. Actually, let me correct that. I've been working on 9 foot by 3 foot dimensions. This row cover over here that you see is 9 feet by 3 feet. And that is because we made some raised beds using some scrap lumber we found. They were 6 feet, 1 by 6s, and we used them to make 9 foot by 3 foot beds. That was all the lumber that we had to do. And so that's kind of like the default size we have right now. And hang on a second, nothing wants to stay in this ground. It's just, there's too many rocks. So our first high raised bed was this. It's 9 feet by 4 feet. And it's 4 feet on the outside. And if you look at the logs, they're easily 6 inches wide. And so the growing area is closer to 3 feet. And with these beds over here, with lower to the ground, it's, what can I say, I'm short. It's hard to reach in the middle. So we know how to make the sizes and to something that's more reachable. We're going to make everything into raised beds. That's a matter of accessibility. So going with accessibility, what I was going to do, we weren't going to do this bed. We were just going to weed it and leave it because it's got which ones? Red Wethersfield onions growing in it that were actually planted last year and then disappeared. And then they came back this year. And so we were going to leave this and just kind of go with the other beds and fix those up and make them more usable, because the crabgrass is growing under these logs. As you can see, there's insane amounts of dandelions and other weeds going into here. So the more we raise the beds, the easier it'll be to tend to them and weed them and so on and so forth. So we started off with this, just kind of used the space that we had and made this high raised bed as an experiment. And from there, we've decided we're going to make a series of these 4 foot by 18 foot beds, and they're going to be joined together in pairs. You can see the next one is marked out over here, and we've got logs set up. These are going to be upright supports for a trellis tunnel. So each pair of beds is going to be joined by a trellis tunnel. And so we're hoping to have 2, 4, possibly as many as 8 in this area. A couple years ago, we grew stuff in here. You can see the mulch, and just last year we couldn't grow in here at all. It was just completely taken over. So that's another reason why we need to go into the higher raised beds. So for these, we're going to start with just 2 logs high, but over time, we can make them taller as we need to. Now, the dimensions we're talking about here, the reason we're going with 4 feet, 4 foot paths. I'll go back over here. So there's a 4 foot path in between the beds, And that is for accessibility, not just to get through with a lawnmower or a wheelbarrow, but when the time comes and we're using walkers or wheelchair or anything like that, we'll still be able to garden. That's why we're after the high raised beds and the 4-foot maximum for reach and the 4-foot width for the paths, so you have room to turn with a walker or something like that. That's actually, if you don't have mobility issues, 4 feet can be a waste of space. So we actually have the luxury of space, so I'm not too worried about that. So 4-foot paths, and then I made a very potentially bad mistake when I first measured out. Marked off over here, ran a string across, and I started measuring 4 feet by 3 feet. Because, well, we've got the 9-foot by 3-foot beds, and all the row covers are 3 feet wide, and that's based on the growing width, not the bed width. And so I had to redo everything. So I just stuck these posts in and I measured out. So every one of these posts is now 4 feet apart. And as you can see, the existing beds do not line up. So we're going to have to shift everything over by quite a bit to get the dimensions that we need. It's a lot of work. And oh gosh, yeah. And this was a squash patch. It's being taken over. Eventually this is going to be turned into garden as well. It gets a lot more shade because of so many trees. But so what we're going to do is shift these beds all over to make the 4-foot beds with 4-foot paths in between them. And they are, I don't know, depending, we don't have a lot of time. Our last frost date is June 2nd. And this weekend, a lot of people traditionally do put their gardens in. It's the May long weekend. In our area, we can't do that because of our June 2nd frost date. We are still potentially going to get frost in the next few nights. So there's no chance of planting on the long weekend. But we can and need to get these beds prepped because I've got a whole bunch of transplants that need to go in. And, well, it's a big job. So I'm going to start off just with this one bed over here. It's got all the onions in it. Because of how much the whole thing needs to shift, we'll just start right here instead of just leaving this one bed. And I've already removed the logs that were around it and started to remove this one. So I'll set the camera up on the tripod, put it on time lapse, and we'll see how it goes. So I'm pausing a bit with the weeding and digging over here. I've got a lot of dandelion taproots to dig out, a lot of crabgrass rhizomes to dig out. I paused, I figured I'd do this end and work my way back to the middle, and found, well, first of all, I can't really see them all, but I can feel them when I dig in the fork. There's tree roots from these elms over here that I'm getting hung up on. And then there's, I'm hitting rocks, a lot of rocks. So this is going to be a little more difficult to do, so I'm going to pause on this and take a bit of a break. Okay, so this is as far as we're going to get at this point. I've piled the soil up in the middle so that when we bring the logs over, there'll be space for them. I've extended the bed to the 18-foot mark, and I've pulled in one side to get that 4-foot path. And then I extended this side to the 4-foot mark. And then we'll have another 4 feet cleared for this bed here. And it's getting hot and muggy, and it's time to stop for the day. Aww.